It's the history of this community as it was built around and evolved around the people that lived in this house at 40 Neponset Street, Colonel Timothy Mann house. This is the deed to this house, and this is dated 1770. It was before we were a nation, and you can't really read it, but it gives the metes and bounds down in here of this land. So I took this old deed and I tried to figure out how it would look. And I think that the house, and the house, we'll get into this in a bit, but I think that it was moved, and so it looked like this. It was two rooms up and down, and with the kitchen on the back there. And this deed starts out at the street, at the road to Rentham, it calls it, which is the road to Rentham, and it goes to the corner of the house. Then the famous quotation of these old deeds, as the fence now stands to a pile of rocks, and that was where that would be. Then northwestward or westward to the dam or to the mill, and across the dam being the bound, I think, and then upstream until about here, and then back to the road and to the point of beginning. And so, taking the deed, I tried to figure out how it would look, and I sketched it out, and my friend Herb Ross drew this picture of it. This is the different times that the house was built. Now, this is the door, which is right here. We're in this room here. This is one of the 1770 rooms, as are these right here. That would be this room, the parlor over here, the two rooms above, and what is now the den on the back. And then 1826, one of the daughters of Truman Clark said, "Father squared up the house," and he added this part to it. So then the house was essentially square with the mudroom on the back. Then in 1861, Henry Clark, Truman's son, was getting married for the second time, and he built this wing, which is Daniel's wing out there on the back, so that he would have bigger living quarters on this side of the house. And the house looks like this, as it did for a good long time, and this is as it looks today. From the back, of course, you can see this is that mudroom I was talking about. The 1861 edition is in there, and then the outbuildings were built in 1877. Last summer I had a need to have an aerial photograph of the area. So my friend David Ruggles took me in his plane, and I hung out the window with Johnny's camera, and this started out right over the church parking lot. That's the church right there. And if you go around this way, this is the big house right on the common, which was called the farmhouse. And then down here is the brown house, which is now an apartment house, and we'll be talking about these houses later on. This was a stable at one time, and the white apartment house right there was also a stable. That's the fire station back in there. This is our field, and the Clark house, this house is back in there. This was the Fuller Tavern in here, the Ruggles house, and now the Bernie Goba house in there, and another house across the street. So that's essentially the buildings that we'll be talking about, some of them during this later on. One of the things about this house that makes it very interesting is the fact that the Clarks started taking pictures about 1890 or thereabouts. And this is the camera that they used. This is not an Eastman Kodak. This was before Eastman Kodak. And the camera is up in the attic, and they had a tripod and they took these pictures. And you know, when you look through the family album, you see pictures and you don't know who the people are because it doesn't tell you. But up in the attic is these box of old pictures, and each one of them is in a nice little manila envelope like this, and it tells you the date, the view, that is who it was, the people that were in the picture or whatever it was, and then it talks about the things that they had to do to develop it, and the kind of film and all that sort of stuff. So all this, these are on glass slides, and there's a whole 2 or 3 boxes of them up in the attic. So you can look at those and look at those negatives, and you see, you know, it tells who the subject was that's in these pictures. So I've taken some of those negatives and gone through the albums and put the name of the people on them. So that's one of the things that really helps to develop the history.
Who did that?
Well, the people that took the pictures, the Clarks, Mabel and Ralph and Will. This is the lady right over there, Betsy Mann. There was Timothy Mann, and Timothy Mann had a son, Timothy, and then they had a daughter, Betsy, and Betsy married Truman Clark. And this is a very interesting picture because, and you can't really see it in the, well, yes you can, but you see right back in there, there is a church steeple. And I never could quite figure this out because the timing isn't right, that she could have been sitting here and the church steeple was outside the window. So I think it was a sort of an allegorical reference to her religion or her well-being, religious.
When was that?
Well, I don't know, how old would you say she was? 20? 22? 25? Pretty young. She was, I think she was married in 1815, and so it was probably shortly after that. And this is the fellow that she married, Truman Clark, who came from Rhode Island. He was a descendant of John Clark, one of the early inhabitants of Rhode Island, a very smart man. He only had, I think it said, six weeks of formal schooling, but he ran the business for a long time. He was able to write and do it very nicely. So he was a pretty smart man in spite of the fact that he didn't have much schooling. This is Aunt Emma. Oops, sorry about that. And Aunt Emma is sitting in the parlor there, and you can see that there's quite a few of the same old things there. There's the lady on the lion, and there's a picture of whatever her name, Stone was. And she was Henry Clark's second wife, and she was my grandmother's sister. And that's how the Belchers got into this picture, because she married Henry Clark, and I'll talk about him a little later. But she married him as his second wife. And these are the Clarks, the last generation. This is cousin Will, cousin Mabel, and cousin Ralph. Will was the oldest, Mabel next, and Ralph was the youngest. And Ralph was worked for Bird Machine. He was a very smart man, did a lot of inventing. And Will was a bookkeeper, worked for Fales Machine Company, and Mabel was the homekeeper. And that's my father and mother sitting in the den as it appeared when they first started coming here in 1955.
Wow.
You can see it was, it's the same, but it's not the same.
Is that a bed? Is that a, yeah.
Well, that was a, yeah, father liked to have a a nap in the afternoon, and so that was a couch that he had in there. And her, present generation
Wow.
sitting there with the dog.
Your mother's glasses.
Yeah, they're pretty big and heavy,
Yeah.
right? That's that was taken, and that was a very small photograph, and you see it had a bend in it there, but it copied fairly well. Well, let's see. This is the deed to the cemetery.